it is really refreshing to see that there is at least one country where militarism, increasing military spending, resort to war is not seen as an automatic and obviously beneficial thing as it is in my country. My countries, I should say. I'm a citizen of the US, UK, and formerly neutral Sweden, and in so much of the world. Because we are in an era where the world is increasingly and dangerously militarizing, where the resort to war, not as a last resort, but as a first resort, as a means of attempting to solve political or security problems is growing, where military spending and the arms industry and trade are growing, and where militarized narratives are increasingly dominating. There has been quite a lot of comment on the decline of peacekeeping in Ireland and globally, and indeed SIPRI data shows huge drops in the number of peacekeepers, UN peacekeepers and other peacekeepers worldwide. And I think that's the flip side of the world militarization, in that there are increasingly few places where there is any peace to keep, where parties to conflicts seem to have any interest in reaching a point of conflict resolution, of reaching a point where you can invite the blue helmets in to keep the peace, where the sponsors of those conflicts, whether great powers or middle powers like the UAE, see profit only in maintaining the war, and where there's just simply no money for these players to be made in a peace agreement, however much it would benefit mutually the peoples on all sides of the conflict. The resort to war as a means of attempting to solve political problems, we see it in the US Israeli attack on Iran, the illegal war on Iran, on Russia's illegal invasion and occupation of Ukraine, and the fact that on neither side is there any sign of an interest in really exploring diplomatic solutions, of really doing what people have talked about in the previous sessions, of putting forward all the data on the problems and trying to see how can there be a cooperative way forward that is not dependent on this horrific war of attrition, killing hundreds, if not thousands, on a daily basis on both sides. And again, neither on the Russian side nor on the Ukraine and the Western side do I see any interest in really pursuing a peaceful diplomatic solution. There is, of course, Israel's genocidal war in Gaza, an increasingly brutal war in Lebanon. Ironically, J.D. Vance just said a couple of days ago, in response to Israel objecting to the US-Iran deal to hopefully end their war, you can't just kill your way out of every national security problem. But clearly, not only Israel, but an awful lot of countries around the world still seem to believe that they can, despite all the evidence to the contrary. And of course, this resort to war and the preparation for war is very much reflected in global military spending and the arms trade. The latest figures from SIPRI showed that military spending in 2025 reached $2.9 trillion. That's almost certainly an underestimate, as there's some countries that aren't even included, even as an estimate in that total. That was an increase in real terms of 2.9% in 2025, year on year. It's increased by over 40% in the past 10 years since 2015. And the signs are only that this is going to increase more and more in the coming years. The United States remains by far the world's largest military spender, although their share of the world total is declining. They were at $954 billion in 2025. The budget for 2025 to 26 for the first time put total US military spending at over $1 trillion in nominal terms. It remains to be seen how that figure actually pans out. And the Trump administration is seeking a budget of $1.5 trillion in 2026 to 2027, which is just an astonishing rate of increase at a time when there isn't an all-out major power war on. Whether Congress passes that remains to be seen, but generally Congress is not a restraint on military spending in the United States, but rather the opposite. So many congressmen are literally in the pay of the arms companies, both Democrat and Republican, especially those that sit on the influential armed services committees. They often indeed, rather than trying to get the Department of Defense to cut back on their ask, they add things on to what the Department of Defense asks for, or Trump's calling it the Department of War now, of course, which is at least more honest. That when the DoD wants to kill off a program because the weapons are no longer relevant, then the Congress often says, no, you can't do that. There's too many jobs involved in our districts. So they actually very often, more often than not, add money on, which is one aspect of the huge influence of the arms industry, of the military-industrial complex that I'll come on to more. A lot of commentators, not necessarily anti-militarist commentators, have pointed out that this massive one-year increase in military spending is not something that the Pentagon can easily absorb, that trying to spend that much more money so quickly is a recipe for waste, fraud, and abuse, for corruption. And really, I think, knowing the character of the current administration, that's almost certainly the point. That when you flood a department like that with huge sums of extra money, it means that contracts are going to be awarded without proper scrutiny, that there's going to be money lining the back pockets of influencers, of Congress people, of regime officials, that it will mean massive unaccountable profits for the arms companies that get these contracts, and very likely often without delivering anything of much use, which perhaps is the only mercy in that if it doesn't actually lead to more lethal weapons being produced, because so much of it is being wasted or going directly into the bank accounts of those who profit from it. Elsewhere, Europe is actually the region where we're seeing some of the largest increases in military spending. In Western Europe, in the past 10 years, there's been an increase of something like 88% in military spending. That's in real terms after accounting for inflation. Western and Central Europe, so that's mostly NATO and EU member states. Russia has more than doubled its spending in the past 10 years, well over doubled, whereas Ukraine's spending, unsurprisingly, in the face of all-out invasion, has increased 16-fold. And of course, as Letitia will get onto in more depth, we're seeing this huge pressure, this unchallenged narrative that in the face of the the real or imagined Russian threat, that Western Europe, that Europe must massively increase military spending, and indeed it is already doing that. We've seen eye-watering increases in military spending, in more than doubling in the past 10 years in Germany, in Poland, in many of the countries bordering Russia or near to Russia, Poland, the Scandinavian countries, the Baltic states. There is this new NATO target of 3.5%, increased from 2%, which was already a very arbitrary figure, of GDP to be devoted to military spending by 2035, which would require hundreds of billions more euros in military spending from most of the NATO member states who do not already meet that figure. This figure of 3.5%, and there's an additional 1.5% to be spent on unspecified other defense and security expenditure. A lot of that is probably not going to be military spending. It's going to be states reclassifying what they're already doing as being other defense and security spending, infrastructure, cyber security, whatever. But a lot of it might also be military or militarized spending, spending on borders, the horrific militarization and lethal militarization of European borders, for example. It will certainly mean much less transparency in spending with this very dubious and vague other defense and security spending. But just on the military component alone, it's unimaginable quantities. It doesn't seem to be based on any actual strategic analysis of what the threat might be. We've got these two competing narratives. On the one hand, and there seems to be some truth of this, that Russia is failing in Ukraine, that their military is under increasing stress and pressure, that they clearly aren't able to overwhelm a much, much smaller country with much fewer resources, and yet we're supposed to be terrified that they are going to be imminently rolling their tanks all over Poland and Central Europe, and that only a doubling of military spending from an alliance that already outspends Russia several times to one is the only way to stop this. So this 3.5% seems to be a figure plucked out of the air to please Donald Trump and, of course, to bring massive profits to the arms industry. So I think it would be good to move on to that issue of the role of the arms industry globally in fueling this militarism, in dominating the narratives that assume that war is the only answer, that war is inevitable or is indeed already happening. In the United States, the arms industry spends massively on, as do other sectors, on campaign contributions for presidential candidates, congressional candidates. They spend massively on lobbying. In the UK, where I've studied most, the arms industry, the privately owned arms industry, has such a close relationship with the UK state that I see it as essentially being a privatized branch of the state. It's not a separate thing. There is a lot of talk of the revolving door, which is very much a reality of people going from government, from the Ministry of Defense and Foreign Office into arms and security industry. But it's become so entrenched that I described it in a report a couple of years ago as more like an open plan office than a revolving door. It is people moving from one branch of the national security state to another. There are numerous fora established on a regular basis for meetings between the government and industry. The BAE systems in the period I was looking at had more meetings both with ministers and with prime ministers than any other private company, though they are far from the largest by any means private company in the UK. And similar patterns, not exactly the same, it varies from country to country, but similar patterns apply in other European major arms producers. And what this means is that the arms industry gets to dominate the narrative on national security and defense and foreign policy. They get to tell the governments what they need. And it just so happens that what governments need for security is what the arms industry and the big companies, and only the big companies, are best able to produce. They often don't do it very well. Projects are massively over budget, over schedule, and then don't deliver. But despite all this, they are extremely profitable for the companies that produce them, that get guaranteed contracts awarded very often without competition, and where they get the profits however much and however repeatedly they fail. And indeed, ministers, even the militarist ministers, one of the UK Armed Forces minister who repeatedly resigned, talked about the enormous waste he sees in the MOD. And that every time you turn over another stone, he said, you encounter more waste. And yet his solution is, so we need to give them even more money. So that they can continue to waste even more money in the hope that if we give them enough money, then despite the waste, we'll actually get some security out of it. It's clearly a losing strategy for even for the armed forces, but most especially for the people around the world. It is not providing security, it is only providing more war and destruction, and really we need to find another way. So I will finish there. Thank you very much.